You like it. Your wife and kids will like Houston and Dallas.
Yeah.
I'll be in Dallas in about 3 weeks for a real estate investing conference.
I'm gonna join you.
Yep.
George.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
George, we should meet up then when you're here. Just
Agreed.
meet up, right?
Okay, I'll come there.
Oh yeah. Let's all meet up.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
I love Dallas. A lot of
So good.
Houstonians don't like it. I love it. Dallas is awesome.
I don't know. Both places are really good places to live,
Mhm.
to raise your kids, for the amenities you have, the quality of life you will get. People are very nice. So that whole package of schools, where you live, quality of life, quality of people, amenities,
Mhm.
Schools especially. I mean, most people have kids now, right?
Right.
Except George. George is.
Give me time.
George avoided that landmine.
I'm gonna catch up to you guys.
I'm going to introduce our guest, Omar, founder and managing partner for Boardwalk Wealth. He has advised on 3.7 billion in capital financing and merger and acquisition transactions, as well as securing 50 million in equity from private and institutional capital. He is a graduate from the Rothman School of Business, which is University of Toronto. This is actually how I found him on LinkedIn, because I went to University of Toronto, and we are very proud people. Whenever we see someone else from University of Toronto, we want to know what they're up to, and he did not disappoint.
There's so many of us. There's not so many of us in the South in the real estate business as as there are University of Toronto people, because it's a big school.
In the US by itself, right? So I'm like, wow, representing from Canada. So Omar is also a CFA charter holder with 10 years of investing experience across real estate and commodities. As the principal of Boardwalk Wealth, Omar is primarily responsible for developing strong relationships with private and institutional investors, brokers, and strategic partners. He has closed on over 250 million of assets across Texas, Georgia, Florida, and South Dakota. So I'm going to just give the floor to Omar and let him, impress us with his knowledge.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Bayo, and thank you, George. You're very kind, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk to your group today. So look, I can get into myself. I would love to talk about myself, but I think it's more important to talk about more substantial things. Basically, a lot of times what I like to tell you is, look, the subject line is how to structure deals with the right loans in 2023. But basically, what I want to tell you is that a lot of times when you hear pitches from people, whether real estate or otherwise, right? The text is always how much money you can make, right? It's always like 2x return, equity multiple, or some like high IRR number. And what I always tell people is, look, you always, first of all, want to figure out your high income earners, right? But a lot of people aren't necessarily as high net worth as they'd like to be, right? Because when you're high net worth, and when you have financial wealth, it allows you freedom to spend time with your family members, do what you feel. So then your jobs, which are high income jobs, aren't necessarily like golden handcuffs. So in this scenario, a lot of times when people talk about making money, a lot of times I flip the perspective and say, well, first of all, you have to figure out that as you're building your capital, how not to lose your money, right? Because how not to lose your money is actually more important than how much money you make, right? Because look, think about it this way. If you have $100 or $100,000, right? And you lose 50% of that on one deal, then you go to 50,000, right? Now you have to get 200% on the next deal just to get back to breaking even. Versus some guy who's been doing, like 10%, 10%, right? So they go 100,000, 10% is 110,000, 110,000, 10% on top of that is 121,000. But if you talk 10% or smaller numbers, it's not sexy marketing, right? Because in our minds, we want big numbers, right? So this is why this topic is very important. How to structure deals with the right loans in 2023. And this is literally where millions of dollars have been made or lost overnight. And I can tell you about this because I also run a distressed operation, which basically when operators are in trouble, we come and we can restructure their deals. And essentially, for the lack of a better words, it is we partner with operators that are trouble. Typically, their trouble is operations, but now a lot of that trouble also is in what type of loans they have. And the loans weren't a good fit for their business plan, right? But when we come in, we don't work for free, right? So we also get our cut, and our cut comes before their cut, because obviously we're helping them out. Like, that's just the way it is. So this is why this topic is going to be very important. And what I want to say is, look, I'm going to go through this, but what I would also like is, as I'm talking, you guys keep putting questions, because I feel it's a lot better when there's a back and forth going on, right? As opposed to somebody, you know, coming and giving a lecture and then going away, right? Because, well, what's the point of that, right? So look, as Bayo said and George said, my name is Omar Khan. I'm the managing partner at Boardwalk Wealth. We are basically, my background is in investment banking, private equity operations, and I advised on about 3.7 now, well, more than $4 billion now, on capital markets, capital financing, M&A transactions, right? So what does that mean? What this means is basically on the sell side, which is sell side in financial
Hey,
terms.
Omar,
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt really quickly, have you make it a big screen.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you for that. See, that's why you get paid the big bucks, man.
Yeah, no worries.
There you
why they
go.
gave me an
That's
MD.
why George gets paid the big bucks.
That's why they gave us MDs.
Yeah. All those years, man, just for that advice. So anyways, look, so the point is, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because sell side, when you hear investment banking, that's sell side, that's advisory, right? So I have both advisory experience as well as actually like the running of the business experience, because advisory is just one aspect, right? Somebody can give you advice, but till you're not in the driving seat, you don't actually realize the ramifications of advice, because a lot of times people that are giving you advice are incentivized by their own ways, right? Think about it this way. If a loan, it's a bit like that old joke, right? If you go to a barber, they'll always tell you you need a haircut, right? So it's a whole thing. If you go to a lender, they'll always tell you need a new loan. If you go to an investment sales guy, they'll always tell you this is the greatest deal, right? So having experiences on both the sell and buy side is very important. We are both acquirers as well as developers. So we take value add acquisition deals. We develop from the ground up, because the whole entire purpose of our organization is to make money. We're very agnostic about asset class, what we do, because at the end of the day, look, guys, we do this to make money. There's no other reason for us to do this, right? So going forward, this is kind of our asset management playbook. The reason why I mentioned this is anytime you're working, if by yourself or you give your money to somebody, it's very important to be working with operationally focused teams. The reason why operations is very important, and it's increasingly becoming more important, is because, look, in the last 5-10 years, you could be just a great marketer and the market would save you because the market's only going up, right? So in effect, what would happen is you could buy something, you could grossly overpay, you could be absolutely horrible at managing the affairs of that asset, and you would still be bailed out because the market was going up. But as we now know, the tide has turned. So this is why it's even more important than before to be working with people that have playbooks that are operationally driven. Obviously, you can pause this later on when you get the recording to go through this in detail. I'm not going to get into this. This is just a snapshot of basically our track record. There's a couple of more deals, but in the interest of, making the slide look sexy, I didn't do all of that stuff, right? But as you can see, our strategies go from value add to core plus to development, because again, the purpose and point of this entire business for us is basically how can we structure deals in a way that our partners, our investors, and ourselves, we make the maximum amount of money, right? That's why it's very important, right? Now, these are a couple of the case studies. I'm just going to quickly go through them. Again, there's a reason for this, and you'll start understanding why I'm talking about this. So this is Blue on Lorraine. This is a class A++++ development. It is expected to be delivered in July of this year. This is in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Now, we sourced this attractive land parcel during COVID directly from lenders. So it's a completely off-market transaction. But check this out. The 5-year fixed rate debt we got on it was 3.24%. And by the time we deliver the product, it'll only be about a year and a half. And initially, our plan was, because we like to have multiple exit strategies, right? So our initial plan was, hey, let's get this really low fixed rate debt. Once we finish the development, which is in July of this year, right? We now have the ability to either refinance and return a boatload of money back to investors quickly, or just chug and plug on this 3.24% interest rate, right? Because we kind of saw where the market was going. Now, what's funny now is obviously we didn't see the extent of where the market has gone. So now when rates are 6, 7, 8%, instead of refinancing, we can just hold on to this debt because now this debt has become more valuable, right? Think about it this way. If you were to develop the same building today, number one, it would cost you more. But the bigger deal is you would be getting a rate that is 7, 8% versus us running it at 3.24%. So that's a big chunk and big difference over here, right? So that's why I wanted to point this out. If you look at Equinox at night, this is another transaction which we went the other way. We use floating rate debt over here. But what we did is we structured the deal in a way that over 3 years, we were able to refinance the deal twice. So think about it this way, right? We got the deal, got it at really good terms. We have a really operationally focused team, crushing it in all regards. We refinance one. Immediately the next year, we can refinance again. And in each time, our investors get massive chunks of capital. So right now, if you were to do the rough math, they've gotten close to 90% of their capital in the form of distributions and refinances, while they're still the same shareholders in the deal. So the reason why I wanted to point out this and this is because while there are different strategies, one is a fixed rate loan, one is a floating rate loan. The fact remains that if you have a team that's very competent on real estate as well as understanding the capital markets, you are able to structure deals to your advantage. And by your, I mean your sponsors, your investors, your partners' advantage. And you're not just some person who's just out there bidding on deals like all of the syndicators out there. And this is why having this knowledge, this background becomes extremely important. Right? Now, here's a couple of other examples. We just refinanced this deal. Basically, we acquired this for how much is 16,200. We acquired this for about 120,895 per unit. Our BOV came in at 331.5 million, which is 235,000 a unit. And this is in about 2 years' time. So think about it this way. We've already refinanced it, returned close to 2/3 plus of the money back to investors. They're still invested in the deal and their equity has grown exponentially, right? Again, that's a combination of understanding real estate operations plus capital markets. And lastly, Lakewood Oaks. Wow, I don't know why this is looking ugly. Give me 1 second because I got to send your people this presentation. I hate it when stuff looks like that. In Lakewood Oaks, the issue here is we acquired this distressed asset. And this was a pure play, operational play, because we got very good equity here. We got this distressed asset, turned it around in about 2.5 years and returned more than 1.5x to our investors. Sorry, I don't know why that went down. Now, let's get into this, right? So what will we cover today? Now that you have all of this background, you understand that there is no one way of doing things, right? There are many ways of doing things. And this is why you have to pick and choose which tool you use for the type of deal that you have. Because a lot of times it's very funny. These days I hear everybody's talking, oh, you should just do fixed rate. And last year it was just, you should only do floating rate, right? So, you know, people go in extremes, but when it's your own money, you have to be very careful and understand that there is no like magic pill, right? Like if you just do this, you will make money, because otherwise everybody would do that, right? So high level wise, what will we cover? Why capital markets mastery is essential. This is why understanding what loan to put when, where's the market going, what's going on, why this is extremely important. And in some cases, it's actually even more important than knowing the actual mechanics of the real estate, in fact. Right? Surprising as it sounds. What are some of the biggest issues facing that operators are facing, people are facing today? And now, what are some of the major financing options you have? So let's assume you have a deal. What are some financing options you have? You are a passive investor and you want to invest in somebody's deal and you're assessing it. How do you assess that in line with the financing options that are out there? Now, what are some typical scenarios we're seeing? And lastly, what deals should investors invest in, right? I mean, that's the big question. How do I know that the deal that I'm looking at, I'm going to make money on it, right? Like, how do you know, right? Because it's all 3, 4, 5 years and everybody has nice graphics and great numbers, right? So let's get into it, right? Why capital markets is essential. Because look, at the end of the day, your cost of capital, this determines everything in the project. So think about it this way. You could have sourced your development or value-add acquisition at below market prices. You could run it like the best operator on the planet. I mean, you know it inside out. You manage your delinquency, you increase rent, you manage your CapEx, you manage your expenses. But your problem becomes if you don't have the right loan product, right, that matches your business plan and matches the profile of the asset, you will be in a world of hurt. This is why all these syndicators right now, they are doing massive capital calls. Their projects are in trouble because they have not matched the type of strategy and the type of asset they have with the type of loan they should get, right? And capital markets experience is becoming increasingly more critical because, as you're saying, this is not like 1980, like whatever. This is not the 80s or 90s, right? Where it's a stable world, everything goes up, 2% inflation for 25 years, expenses go up by 1%, and it's very simple to figure out what's going to happen in the future. I mean, you've seen just in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, we've had COVID, we've had wars, we've had government shutdowns, we have, so much, like, I think it was like something like 36% of all of the money supply America's ever printed got printed in the last term of the Trump presidency, right? I mean, this is not a political comment. Anybody there would have done that. But my point is, it is such a volatile world that we don't even know what's going to happen 3 to 6 or 4 months from now. So because there is so much volatility, it is even more important to understand that when you get a loan, what are the pros and cons of that loan product? Because like I mentioned, right at the start, deals can go wrong, even if you buy it at a good price and you manage it correctly. Because at the end of the day, it's no use to say I bought a deal at a good price. Eventually, you really make the bulk of your money when you sell. So when you go full cycle, that's when you can say, hey, whether the project was successful or it wasn't. In the middle of the project, at the start of the project, can't really say. And capital markets are a big, big, big determinant of whether your project will be successful or whether it will not be successful. Now, going forward, what am I seeing are some of the biggest issues in the market today? So I just want to tell you this. I'm an operator, I'm a developer, but like I mentioned, I also have a distressed fund, right? Where people that are in trouble, they reach out, especially operators, and we restructure their deals. We always try to make sure that we treat our partners fairly, because the fact is, when you treat people nicely, word gets around, you get more business, right? And look, we're in the business of making money. So that's why, for very selfish reasons, if for nothing else, we treat people nicely because we want these people to come back over and over again. And the lament I hear over and over and over again from unsophisticated people these days is somehow floating rate loans are bad. It's like bad. It's like if you use this word, you might as well be cursing somebody, right? You might as well call somebody's wife ugly, really, right? I mean, let me tell you this, they are not evil. Okay, there is nothing wrong with floating rate loans. Similarly, fixed rate loans also are not like the best option, the only thing you should take. Think about it this way. If you've got a really distressed property, right? Basically, you can't value it off of NOI because, there's nothing there, right? But it's in a great location, the demographics are great, and there's a clear path, right? You come in, let's assume you put 15, 20, whatever, $1,000, you have multiple comps around you to prove the rent, right? In that particular case, more often than not, you shouldn't take a fixed rate loan, even in this current environment. Similarly, if you've got a stabilized project, right, where, look, I'm going to get it at a good price, but, we're going to move our rents up a little bit, but this is not like a home run sort of deal. This is like a coupon clipper. In that regard, if you put floating rate loans on that type of product, that's insanity, right? So understanding what your business plan is, what the profile of the asset is, that's very key. So this is why anytime somebody gives you a very blanket statement, right? X is good, Y is bad, right? On loans. You just have to realize you're just not a very sophisticated person because it is very conditional. The other thing that I'm seeing more often than not is a lot of sponsors, the reason why they're in trouble isn't because they didn't buy the right deal or they didn't operate it properly. It's because they're highly levered. And the fact of the matter is, guys, I can tell you this. I do this for a living. If you obviously jack up your leverage in your spreadsheet, your IRR number goes up. This is nothing magical I'm telling you here. The problem with spreadsheets is they are not always an accurate reflection of reality, as we know, right? If the spreadsheet could predict the future, all the guys working in finance would be the richest people on the planet, and that's not the case, right? So typically what's happened with a lot of people is, like even till last year, is because they were unsophisticated and they just layered a lot of they just levered. So now even really good deals are in a lot of trouble because of the high leverage, right? It's something, this is not a tech play, right? Real estate, you can only get a certain amount of cash flow up to a certain theoretical point, right? If you put on more debt, it's not better. But a lot of investors, they just look at the IRR number and they don't look at the other assumptions around, well, how much is the leverage? What are the assumptions? And they just look at IRR and nothing else. So obviously, when you only look at IRR or you only look at equity multiple without understanding the assumptions, the problem becomes sponsors start leveraging more. The other reason for that is when they leverage more, they have to raise less equity. When they raise less equity, it's less work they have to do, but they get paid more fees because now they're doing a bigger project. So please keep that in mind. These are big issues I'm seeing. Another issue I'm actually seeing, which is actually very surprising, is how many big operators are just awful at operations. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of deals come through my desk. These are people that own a couple of thousand units. And their occupancies in big cities, and we're talking like the Dallases, Houston's, Phoenix, Atlanta's, Austin's, Tampa's, Jacksonville's, Orlando. I mean, these people, they're highly levered because they just wanted to do deals to make more fees, to make more money, right, in the short term. But their occupancies are mid-70s, mid-80s. And I can tell you this, that it is frankly a crime if you're in any major city in the Southeast, at least, because that's where we are, right? If your occupancy is in the mid-70s or 80s, it just means whoever you're dealing with, I'm trying to find a good way of saying stupid. Like, okay, they're just stupid. Let me just tell you this, okay? Because, I mean, we have assets in our portfolio, and I think the lowest occupancy, my heart literally starts pounding like this. Like, I mean, I don't know if you can see my screen. My heart starts pounding at like a weird pace when my occupancy goes to 93. I think I have one asset at 93 or 94%. Everything is higher. Because the whole point of being in bigger markets is that you always have a lot of people that you can rent your properties out to, right? That's a big reason, right? So if you have assets, you're working with people where occupancies are low, bad debts are very high within reason, and it's a without reason, and it's a secular trend. Yeah, that's a big issue. A couple of last deals, and these kind of things are related together, is there's a lot of unsophisticated buyers. In the last 5-10 years, the market was going up. Everybody thinks real estate is a get-rich-quick scheme. Let me tell you this, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. There is no business on the planet that is a get-rich-quick scheme. But people started thinking real estate is a get-rich-quick scheme. Multifamily is a get-rich-quick scheme. You'll see engineers, lawyers, business owners quitting their jobs and just going, I'm a full-time operator, this is what I'm going to do. The problem then becomes, obviously, because they have other things going on, they don't understand the capital stack. What do they start doing? They want to do bigger deals. Why do they want to do bigger deals? Because you get more fees. How do you get more fees? You lever highly, right? You have 85, 90, 95% leverage. And that now is becoming a big issue for these people to solve, because especially when they don't have good operations team, right? So what are some of your major financing options? Look, just to let you know, this is not an exhaustive list. I don't think anybody can make an exhaustive list because there are just so many financing options out there, right? The high-level financing options, high-level wise, is again not an exhaustive list, is agency, bridge, preferred equity, mezzanine, lifeco, and banks, okay? There's a couple of others. We can talk about that. So please don't, send me an email saying, oh, I missed this one thing. Obviously, that's the case. Agency is also called permanent financing. Obviously, it's not permanent forever. It's just long-term. It can be anywhere from 5 to 12, 15 years. Bridge, as the name says, it's a bridge to something. So as I talked earlier, right, you have a distressed asset, but it's in a great market, great sub-market, great demos. You see the business plan. So what you do is bridge is usually higher leverage financing, but it's a bridge to something, right? It's a bridge from distressed to stability. Right? That's why it's called bridge financing. Preferred equity sits kind of between your senior loan, think about it, agency, and your common equity. They are, say, think about it as a hard money loan, right? But typically, if you're a preferred equity provider, it's very hard for you to take over a property, right? But mezzanine financing is where you're kind of like a hard money loan, but if your sponsor doesn't pay, they have the ability to take over a property's operations. Essentially, you can take over, right? And lastly, Lifeco basically comes from life insurance companies. They have a lot of money that they have to put out. So typically they do lower leverage, but very attractive rate financing. And obviously you have the obvious case of banks, right? You go to your local bank, you typically get a $5, $10, maybe $15 million loan, and you go buy a property. right? That's a big thing. Now, just to let you know, banks are typically recourse, typically, not always. Recourse basically means that in the off chance the person running the property doesn't pay the bills, the bank typically, or any recourse lender, has the ability to basically essentially make themselves whole by going to the person's other assets and saying, hey, man, you own that other asset, right? Why don't you sell it and pay me back my money? Right? Whereas in some of these other options like agency, bridge, typically, preferred equity, typically, mezzanine and life co, typically, they are not, they're called non-recourse, which means, let's assume you've got a property, unfortunately can't make your debt payments. Typically, they will not go after your other assets. Now, you would think, well, why would anybody sign recourse debt over non-recourse debt? Well, the reason is that a lot of times, if you have a very localized deal in a small market, or it's a very peculiar sort of deal, or maybe you want to close in, say, 15, 20, 30 days, or some version of that, then some of these other options aren't a good fit. Because look, agency takes 45 to 60 days. Bridge takes about the same time. Preferred equity can be done in 30 days, but let's be honest, it's about 30 to 45 days. And mezz and life will take about the same 30 to 45 days, right? So if you want to close early, you sometimes maybe want a little bit different terms, maybe you have a relationship. That's why typically people go to banks, right? Now, typical scenarios. What are people doing right now to save, quote unquote, their deals? Well, we all used to hear, like,
I'm going to interrupt a little bit, just before we move too far away from the 2 slides ago. So one of the things I wanted to add was, I see that more of the time that operators have a capital call, most of the time I find it to be with the floating rate. I do understand what you're saying in terms of the fact that you can't just say floating rate is evil. But people that did not refinance, or at least get to, like, a better interest rate when they saw the interest rate going up, I'm finding that a lot, especially with the bridge loans. So, so that the 2 capital calls that I have seen are all based on the kind of variable rate. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, my thought there is, again, while obviously I can't talk about 100% of the cases, right? So this is a generalized comment. Typically what's happened is that a lot of these people, number one, either were very highly leveraged, because this is a very common thing, extremely highly levered. Look, even if you've got the greatest deal in the world, but you're 90% levered, bio, okay, you're playing with fire, man. It doesn't matter how good you are. It's just playing with fire, right? Number one, a lot of these people are extremely highly levered. Okay. Number two, they typically don't have enough cash reserves. So what happens typically is think about yourself, right? We all know this, that we've been told, and all our parents tell it, society tells us, hey, when you get some money, you get income, right? You save some income for the rainy day, right? Because you never know when the rainy day will come, right? Cash reserves are exactly the same thing. You raise a little bit of money, you put it aside, right? Because, hey, the rainy day will come. What you also do is you don't have the greed to do bigger deals, right? So let's assume if your balance sheet only allows you to do a $10 million deal, because, that's how much liquidity you have, that's how much your balance sheet is, you're comfortable, you don't go and do a $30 million deal. Okay, I'm just sorry to tell you. There are lots of guys that are worth maybe $5 million. Again, nothing wrong with that, right? Doing $70 million deals, right? It's a bit like, if you bite off more than you can chew, then you don't have a good operations team. You don't have cash reserves. You don't have funds for the rainy day. You're playing with fire. So yeah, when you say a lot of these people are in floating rate debt, because it's not just floating rate debt, it's all the other things around it, right? Floating rate, it's like if you're a doctor, if you only look at the surface-based thing and not the underlying symptoms, right? So what you're seeing is just the outward manifestation of many factors that are there. And look, lastly, guys, I just want to point this out. You also have to realize sometimes bad things happen to good people. So you could also do everything correctly. You could be thoughtful. You could be reasonable. You could have good, adequate cash reserves, money for the rainy day, liquidity on the side, but things can still go bad. This is a business, right? So nothing that I'm going to tell you here is like, I wish I could tell you, hey, if you just do this, you have 100% guarantee for success, because those things do not exist. That's called an arbitrage or a risk-free profit. And if there was a risk-free or riskless way rather of making profits, everybody would be doing it. Right. So that's the color I want to add, right? I mean, we're looking at the outward manifestation, but not the symptoms around it.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
So no worries. And please interrupt me because, like I said, it's better to have a conversation.
I have one more, and then George has one. So, so what's your perfect leverage? I know you're going to say there's no perfect, but what is your absolute best percentage to leverage? Just to,
I think it's highly dependent on the deal. So let me just give you this is not a cop out. I'm going to literally give you specific examples of deals that we've done. Okay. Earlier in the cycle, right? We're talking 2017, 2018. I did deals at 80% leverage, right? In November of last year, I closed a deal at 65% leverage. Right. So I had to raise for a deal that's roughly the same size. I had to raise about $3 million more, or maybe a little over $3 million more for pretty much the same size deal. And if you think about it, raising $3 million more was close to about 50% more money. But it's not like I got paid 50% more. I just had to go raise 50% more money because we were in a different time. Right. So I would love to tell you again, like I have a magic answer. I mean, I'm just not that intelligent maybe to have a magic answer, but it's very situational on what time, what environment you're in, right? Because the environment a lot of time dictates the actions you will take, as opposed to you having a number in your head and then you go out and let's assume your number is 65%. You go out to the market and the market says, I will only give you 50. Then what do you do? Right. Yeah. So my point is our thoughts alone have no bearing. What is also important is the environment in the market that we're in.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the bank right now won't even loan above 75% right now. So that's what we're seeing. Yeah.
And think about it this way. Maybe if you won 2 years ago, you could have had a worse project with worse demographics, worse rents, worse everything. They would give you 80% money.
Yeah, true.
Everything was worse, but they'll give you more money.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why. But George, you had something. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to talk about the list that you put. I know you said it's not exhaustive, but I have seen kind of like a little uptick in HUD loans. And I was curious about where that might fall in this list.
Oh, yeah. HUD would be some pros, right? Addition. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Cons about it. Just curious about it. Just seen a little uptick in those loans.
That's a good point. I can change it to a HUD would be another one. HUD is typically not as widely used. I guess unless you're in Class A. Class A now it's being used. Let me give you an example. Like, let's put it this way. Typically, HUD is used by developers. So we're developers. We typically use either bank loans or HUD loans, right? To develop. The advantage of using HUD, if you're a developer, is very simple reason. You get a fixed rate and the amortization is, I think, 35 or 40 years. So 40. Obviously 40 years, right? So when you amortize, think about it this way. I could say, hey, George, I'm going to give you a loan for 10%, but we're going to amortize it over 200 years, right? That payment will be way different than you get a 10% loan, same loan, amortized over 10 years, right? I mean, the difference is night and day. Right. So and typically the amortization period, say for agency, as an example, is 30 years. So with a HUD, typically you get a 35-year loan, but it's amortized over 40 years. So your payment, pound for pound, your payment goes down, number one, right? Just the sheer debt service payment you have to pay if you're a developer. What the other deal also is, they let you build in your developer, basically your developer fees. It's called BISPRA. Again, I'm overgeneralizing here. Essentially, what it allows you to do is you get higher leverage, right? You get higher leverage, and it's somewhat of a, I would like to say it's not as easy as people make it sound to be, because that shit takes forever because you're dealing with the government. Now, that's typically on the development side. What's really started picking up steam right now is, I think it's don't quote me, 223 or something F. I think that's the loan. Let's assume you have an existing asset. It's typically a good fit for Class A assets, right? So you have an existing asset. You're not a developer. You own a Class A asset. You can then also use HUD financing to basically finance that asset because it's an existing asset that you have. It's not just for developers anymore. The advantage to that is like they have a lower debt service coverage ratio that you have to meet. So obviously, I think agency is 1.25 and HUD is, I think, 1.17. So when you have a lower debt service coverage ratio, this just essentially, it's a fancy way of saying you're going to get more proceeds, right? Also, because they amortize it longer versus say a 30-year amortization, it's a 40-year amortization. Now that payment is reduced, which means your loan amount is increased. Right. So for a lot of Class A people that are in trouble right now, their deals maybe don't size up for agency, they might be a good candidate for HUD. Now that's a pro, right? I mean, you can kind of get your way out of that problem. The problem only is that they are long-term loans. So let's assume this way, you want to get out of the deal, right? So in the first 10 years, there's multiple ways to do this, but the most common way is it goes down is your first year, if you want to get out, is a 10% of the loan point pre-penalty and goes 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? So after the 10th year, if you want to get out of the loan, all you got to do is pay a 1% penalty, 1 point on the loan, you get out. The pro in this regard still is that HUD loans are assumable. So for instance, George, if you had a HUD loan and whatever, you crush it, you're doing a great job, I come to you 2 years later, I give you a good price, you want to sell it to me, I can assume that loan.
Okay.
Right? Otherwise, say if you're in a bank financing, typically you have to wind up your financing. I have to get a new loan. So think about it this way. If you have a HUD loan right now, that's say at 3%. And the market is at 8%. So what a lot of brokers have started doing as a means to, you guys are going to find this funny. What a lot of brokers have started doing as a means to advertise and get more pricing is they say, well, it's a HUD loan. It's fixed for another 32 years. So because your payment is only going to be at 3 or 4% or whatever the lower rate is, therefore, you know, if you just went out to the market and you'll get a 6 or 7% rate, and therefore you'll have to pay less money for the same project, well, now you pay us more money, right? Because, yeah, but the flip side to that also is that your leverage will be very low because you're paying more money, the loan balance is going to stay the same, right? So think about it this way. If your loan balance is, say, $20 million, right? And the price of the asset, if you were to go out and get agency loan or whatever's current financing, right, is $30 million, right? So you go, again, keeping all things simple, assuming there's no closing cost, blah, 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 blah. You go like loan divided by purchase price, 20 divided by 30 is 60.67, right? 66.7, 2/3 roughly, right? Now, because the rate is so low, the broker says, no, dude, you got to give me, we need $40 million. And you now as a syndicator, you go advertise to all of your lists saying, look at the rate we got. It's 2.5% or 3% or whatever. And everybody just looks at the rate and they don't look anything else. Well, the problem there also becomes, if you buy the asset for $40 million, well, now your leverage is 50%. So at the end of the day, while it would be while I would love to tell you there's one way of doing things, a lot of times it might end up being better to pay, say, a higher rate, but at a lower price.
Right.
Depending on the particulars of that situation, right? So what you also have to realize, this is why I tell investors, you have to understand these things, because when somebody wants your money, as an example, and by the way, I'm in this list, right? Because I'm a person, I go raise money. So I include myself in this list. When somebody wants your money, they are obviously biased, right? It's a bit like, well, you don't have kids, George, but you know, Bio and I have kids. And when we look at our kids, we think, wow, this is the prettiest child in the entire world. My God, my child is the prettiest, most beautiful person in the entire world. Every single thing my child does is cute, right? Because when it's your own deal and you have to go raise money for it, you'll only advertise the positive things. But when you are a passive investor and you have, you know, your money is the sum of your blood, sweat, and tears, right? Well, you have to be very careful because you don't want to give that money to somebody looking at one factor and realize, oh, there's a whole other game being played on this side.
I think that's a huge important point for passive investors, you know, is to look at the bigger picture, look at all the factors, you know, not just one or two. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of early passive investors will look at. They'll look at the common three things instead of actually a bigger picture. And it takes time, right? You got to learn the terms and learn the concepts, but it's super important. So that's a great point.
Yeah, and this is why, and I say this, look, in full disclosure, I am a developer, I'm a syndicator, I have to go raise money. So I include myself in this because our biases all I'm trying to say is don't let a sponsor's biases affect your decision. Yep. Because you should take your decisions independently.
Absolutely.
Right? So look, typical scenarios that I'm looking right now are for the past 10 years or so, nobody had even heard the word cash in refinance, because it was all cash out, right? You refinance, you take out the whole bunch of money, like I told you, right? I mean, we refinanced one deal, Brighton Farms, took 2/3 of the capital, paid it back to investors. The other deal, Equinox at Night, refinanced twice in 3 years, right? Well, right now what's happening is, because the rates have gone up so much, so even though your performance at the property might have gone up, you still can't qualify for a refinance. So now guys have to either put in money into the deal. No, people hadn't heard that in like forever, right? This is a new thing for a lot of people, right? So cash and refinances are happening. In fact, I know one developer in Dallas, he had to put $7 million into his own deal. I mean, he didn't personally put it, he raised the money, but still, it was cash in. It wasn't cash out. It wasn't pulling cash out. Just to keep the deal going, they had to put $7 million more, right? Now, typically, what I always tell people is start with the GP investment into the deal. But a lot of times, again, it's to Bio's point, right? Or rather, the discussion I was having with Bio is that, look, when you have a $5-10 million balance sheet and you want to do a $70 million project, when things go wrong, you just don't have enough money. So if you don't have enough money, you should first of all, the money should be coming out of your pocket, right? To stabilize at least some aspect of the deal, right? Well, GP investments into the deal should be there, but it's not happening right now because just a lot of these guys just don't have any money. So what do they have to do? They have to do a capital call. Well, the problem with the capital call is, number one, look, oftentimes it's warranted, right? I mean, I'm not taking anything away. It could happen to anyone. It could happen to me. It can happen to you. It can happen to anyone. The problem with the capital call is that you as a passive investor now have to think, should I throw good money after bad? Right? If I've already given somebody money, this deal is already not performing, and now they need even more money to stabilize the deal. Well, what do? Right? And typically, most people realize, hey, I don't have to throw good money after bad, right? Whatever.
Can you define capital call for people?
So capital call, for instance, happens in this scenario. Thank you for that. In this scenario, capital call basically means that, let's assume, God forbid, you invested in a deal and rates have gone up, operations are sideways, whatever it is, and the sponsor reaches out and says, look, we have to raise more equity to stabilize the deal or refinance the deal or whatever, just to not lose the deal, whatever that set of circumstances is. So first of all, ideally what they should be doing is dipping into their own pocket, but maybe they don't want to dip into their pocket. Maybe they don't have enough money or whatever that combination of things is. So now they will go out to their investors and say, hey, please give us more money, because number one, if you don't give us money, then there is obviously the chance that we'll probably lose the deal. Or if we bring in somebody else, then your share will be diluted, right? So think about it this way, right? If there's a $1 million equity raise and you gave $500,000 as an investment, well, your share, let's assume, is 50%, right? 500,000 divided by a million, right? In this scenario, right? Well, now if they need another $1 million and it's not coming from you, now the total dollars in the deal would be $2 million. So it'll be 500,000 divided by 2 million, which is 25%, right? So now your share went down from 50 to 25%. Even though it's the same amount of money that you've invested, right? So in this particular scenario, a lot of LPs are like, yeah, screw it, don't really give a shit. I don't have to throw good money after bad. But again, these are happening, these things. Now, typically, what's also happening is that if people want to go into agency financing, right, which is typically, you're in a bridge loan or some version of a bridge and pref, you want to go to an agency financing because your deal is not basically qualifying. So what a lot of people are doing, there's a lot of pref equity funds out there, right? Pref equity, as I told you earlier, think about it this way, as a hard money loan, right? But high interest hard money loan. So what they'll say is, look, your deal is, say your loan, as an example, your bridge loan is $30 million. I'm making this up, right? And you go to the agencies, they say, we'll only give you $25 million as loan proceeds. Well, where do you come up with the other 5? So these people say, hey, we'll give you the other 5, but we'll give you these other 5, but we get paid first. So your agency person gets paid, preferred equity gets paid, then your common equity, the shareholders, passive investors get paid. So they become senior to you. You understand? So in effect, you are more at risk now because other mouths have to be fed before you are fed, right? Or what's also happening is a combination of all of the events above. You have an agency plus prep plus capital call plus GP investment. It's all hands on deck. And lastly, there are also scenarios where even though you could potentially have, say, these funds lined up, your lenders might not want to work with you because they say, look, man, I don't want to give my money to somebody who already has five out of their six deals in trouble, as an example, right? Who are you going to bring in as an operator? Because think about it this way, right? Would you as a lender give your money to somebody who has a very high chance of losing that money? No, it's not a trick question. That's the honest answer, right? No, you won't, because that's stupid. So typically, then you have rescue capital or operators that bring in capital, but as well as operating expertise, which is people like us typically, right? Because we acquire and develop our own self. We also do this, right? Because a lot of times in this scenario, it also becomes an optics case. Think about it this way. You took money from somebody. You are not paying them the money now, but you tell them, hey, bro, I got all this money and I'm going to just give me like 6 months and I'll pay you back. And the guy very legitimately says, look, man, I have no faith in your abilities at all. So I want somebody else who's actually a professional manager, in their opinion, right, to come in to manage this. Otherwise, I'm going to take my loan back, right? So for that sponsor to protect their deal, protect you, and a whole host of other things, they will bring on other partners. When those partners come on, these are people like us typically, we will also take a share of the deal, right? Because why would we work for no money? Right? So that's where rescue capital operators come in. Rescue capital can also be in the form of preferred equity, but the operations angle is also very important because it's no use giving money. I mean, you still have to go perform, right? Because if you have a deal in Dallas and it's got mid-70s occupancy, no amount of money is going to save you because you suck at operations, right? Eventually, it's not a money issue, right? You got to actually do the work. Right? So that's where these typical scenarios are coming in. So lastly, what deals should investors invest in, right? I say, look, guys, I get this question a lot. Typically, I tell people is, look, forget about the deal. Just completely forget about it. And people say, like, what do you mean by that? And I say, look, what you're doing as a passive investor typically is you have to assess the team behind the deal. Okay. Now, this doesn't mean that once you assess the team and you feel they're good, that it's going to be 100% chance of success. But assessing the team is a lot more important than practically any number crunching you will do on a spreadsheet. Okay. That's just the way it is. That's always been the case because when you deal with, so there's two C's that I look for. Character and competence. And the example I gave is, look, we obviously want to be around high character people with good morals, with good integrity. But if they're completely incompetent, we don't want to be with those people because what's the point of being with somebody who's got good character but is an idiot, right? You don't want to give that person your money. Conversely, you don't want to be with somebody who's extremely competent. They're very sharp, but they're a crook. They have no character at all, right? They're a Bernie Madoff type person. You also don't want that, because this person's going to steal your money and just run away. So what you want is a combination of teams and people that have high character and high competence in the area that you want to invest. And if you want to invest in real estate, then you have to be with teams that have real estate as well as capital markets experience and specialists. They understand their capital stack inside out, but alongside it, they are very heavy in their operations. Because if they're not good in their operations, none of this other stuff is going to work out. Right? So there you go, guys. If you want to learn more, you can opt into our mailing list by going to our homepage. It's right over there, boardwalkwealth.com. Sign up to our mailing list. You'll get invited to our mobile app, 9 hours of free passive investing training, blah, blah, blah. But more importantly, please think about these things. These things are very important because you worked really hard for your money. So when you work really hard for your money, don't just throw it away. I mean, 50,000, even if you're a physician, look, the average physician, I'm assuming, makes 300, 400, 500 grand, something like that. I'm assuming, right? You guys tell me, Bio, George, right?
Probably 250.
250? Well, okay. So if you make 250, think about it this way, right? Even if you live in the state of Texas, which says no state income tax, there's still a federal tax, right? And property taxes. So you make 250, you're still probably making 150 to 175, right? Net when you take home, right? If you think about it, even $50,000 is close to 1/3 of the entire value of your yearly labor, right? So while it might not seem like a lot, in terms of the amount of days you have to work to have the same labor reflect dollars, it's a long time. So think really carefully before you give your money to somebody. But I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't want to sound doom and gloom. I just wanted to, answer questions, and now let's take it from there.
Yeah, we love to look at both sides of the equation because I was LP I still LP my own deals too. So I'm still LP at the same time as GP. George has done like 22 LP deals. So
George
he's
is a baller, man.
He's the
I love
king
him.
of LPs. He
I love him.
literally can write a book on LPs.
They're
So
awesome.
you have some questions. I know you were discussing some questions early on.
Yes. So just to remind everyone, please throw your questions either in the chat, or you can even come off mute, come off video, or come on video and ask questions. So, but I'll get things kind of kicked off here. Interest rate caps. Is that something that a LP should be looking at if a operator is purchasing those, and how much in detail should we?
That's the short answer is yes. Yes. I'm going to share a personal example now. So, when we were doing this distressed stuff that I told you about, right? Especially when the floating rates went up, I initially thought, okay, rates go up. It can, a lot of times, like I said, bad things can happen to good people. So I thought, okay, well, rates go up. There might be some problems there. Let's see what we can do. You would be shocked at how many deals I've seen that are in trouble where people did not want to pay for a rate cap up front because they somehow thought they were wanting to save money. And they just ran headfirst into a disaster. Jamestown, and by the way, this is not just with syndicators. I think it's Jamestown. I could be wrong. Jamestown is a very, very, very well-respected developer, totally institutional level. And there's another German family office in Atlanta, I think right now. They're building close to $1 billion in Midtown. And for whatever reason, they wanted to be cheap 2 years ago and not buy a rate cap. And now they have to pay over $1 million extra in interest per month. Okay, guys, this is like insurance. Okay, we buy health insurance or life insurance, not because we want to die. We buy it because in case we died, there is some recourse. There is some benefit to our families, right? It's the same as getting whatever, like your car insurance. You don't want to get into an accident, but if you did, something's there to protect you.
And I want to make sure we leave no man or woman behind. What are interest rate caps?
So interest rate caps are essentially in effect, think about it this way. They're like an insurance product, right? So I have a very extensive video I can share with you guys. If you email me, I can send you it's how to calculate all of these things technically. But essentially what interest rate caps are, they're an insurance-like product. So think about it this way, right? Let's assume George, Bio, and I are doing a deal. We go to a lender and we get a floating rate loan, and the market rate, whatever is 5% right now. Right. So, and we say, we've stress tested our deal, and we say, if rates go above 6%, as an example, our deal would be in trouble. So what we do is we go to an interest rate cap provider, and obviously it's a cost associated with this. And we say, hey, man, I need this insurance, which says if rates go above, say, 6%, any amount of extra funds that I have to pay for rates going above 6%, my counterparty will pay me. That's the insurance. My counterparty will pay me for that. Why do we do that? We do that so that in a way, when we're actually working on, say, short-term projects or distressed projects, non-stabilized projects, right? We can get them to stability. We refinance out. What we don't want to do is, while we're doing the value add, while we're doing the renovations, while we're, cycling in higher quality residents, now the whole world changes, which it has changed in the last few years. And now our deal has just gone away.
Great explanation. Another factor that maybe we can look at as passive investors, looking at the debt structure, is the IO period, the interest only period. How is that negotiated, or can you, as the prospective buyer, kind of have a role in how long that period is? 2 years versus 5 years?
Yeah.
Why do we care?
Look, you care because obviously think about it this way, right? First, I'll tell you why you care, and then I'll tell you how or what it doesn't happen, right? You care because the longer you just have to pay interest only, it just means you're not paying the amortizing amount. So your cash flows in the deal, that once you're done paying your employees, once you're done paying for all the expenses, once you're done paying the lender, there are more cash flows in the deal, right? Essentially, that's a long and short answer. Now, typically, there's a market rate for these things, guys. So if you're like a single, say, syndicator, buyer, acquirer, whatever it is, developer, yeah, you probably don't have a lot of influence. Maybe you can kind of negotiate and say, look, I got this one guy giving me 3 and the other guy's giving me 2, but it's not like one guy's going to give you 2 and the other guy's going to give you 10. right? Because these are all things that are priced at market. It's a very competitive marketplace. So there's no big differences. And typically you're a price taker, not a price maker. But the fact also is that from the price taker side, if you're sophisticated, you realize you're in a very highly competitive bazaar. So the same way that you want a loan, lenders also want to give you loans. So if one lender says, my rate is, I don't know, 20%, and the market rate is 5%, that guy will never get any business, right? So it's a highly competitive thing, but you're a price taker, you're not a price maker.
Absolutely. Okay, my last question is loan assumption strategy. You mentioned that earlier in the talk. It seems like it's picked up as far as the popularity of it, which is a great strategy to just assume a low fixed rate debt. How does that actually happen? Is that something on the buyer side or on the seller side? How does someone acquire a loan assumption?
Well, it's pretty simple, right? I mean, if I have a property and let's assume my loan is assumable, and like I gave you the HUD example, right?
Right.
My loan is assumable, and you say, hey, man, I'll give you an XYZ price, but I want this loan as an example because if I go out into the open market, I'll get a more expensive loan. Well, it's pretty simple. It depends though, but your lender has to allow you to do loans on. Typically, agencies, HUDs, these people allow you to assume loans for a nominal fee, but that process isn't really that hard. But again, just realize in loan assumption deals, typically, not always, because again, it's very contextual, right? Typically, what's happening is people are advertising, by people, I mean syndicates, right? They're advertising the low rate and the whatever, blah, blah, blah. But what they're not telling you is, yeah, they're assuming the loan, but they're not paying market price. They're paying above market price.
Love it. Right.
So 9 times out of 10, when you do the math, actually, you realize that, and I do this for a living, guys, again, not saying loan assumptions are bad, because sometimes you get a good deal. 9 times out of 10, when you assume a loan, it's because you overpaid. And like I said, sometimes it's better to pay a higher rate at a smaller price than to pay a lower rate at a much higher price.
Because you can cash out, refinance to once the markets become more favorable, then you still have the equity in it.
Exactly. And it's like that saying, it's the saying, right? You date the rate, but you marry the house, right? So if you're, say, looking at the house, right? Let's assume, these days houses are, because of rates is becoming very hard. So a lot of times the saying is, look, if you find a house in a good neighborhood, good locality, you want to, you got kids, you want to send them to school, blah, blah, blah. And it's a good neighborhood school, right? So if you can afford it, you date the rate, as in your rate is temporary. If rates go down, you can kind of refinance, to buyer's point. But you buy the house, you marry the house, right? So if you get the right product at the right price, all of this stuff comes after that, guys. If you don't pay the good price, none of this other stuff matters. Because once you overpay, you're in a hole.
Yeah.
I love it. I think these are great terms to just kick around and have folks hear it and understand it, because they're going to see it on an executive summary, or, they're going to see it on an OM, and, knowing what they really mean is important. It's an advertising tool, but it may have more information. There may be more things to dig into behind that to really understand what that loan product looks like.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I have one more. Another thing, I joined the mastermind group, and they are so big on seller financing.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you just, what's your experience with that? And is it always, because they say always look for seller financing first, essentially?
I can tell you that maybe it happens like 1% of the times in
right?
The history. Look, if you're doing, guys, think about it this way. Again, it is a tool. Do you understand? When people make a tool like the gospel, like the word of God, like we said, hey, floating rate is not always evil, and fixed rate isn't always the answer, right? These are all things that are tool. It's like a knowledge set that you have, right? You have to pick the right tool for the right job. A lot of times when you're in these mentorship groups, think about it this way. What will a guru tell you? The guru is not going to tell you, whatever guru you have, is not going to tell you, look, man, you just got to use your common sense, and here's like a couple of variables. The guru has to provide you some level of mental, surety. Hey, if you do these 5 things, you'll lose 20 pounds, you'll go to heaven, your relationship with your wife will be better, and your kids will get into Harvard, right? The guru has to literally say things like that. But this is all bullshit, as we all know. right? In reality, what happens is if you're doing bigger deals, your counterparty, the guy or girl that's selling you the deal, right? They're not unsophisticated the same way you are not unsophisticated, right? It's not like somebody just stumbles ass backwards into a $40 million deal. That only happens in Hollywood movies, right? So typically the seller financing stuff might work, and it does work maybe in 1 or 2% of the cases. More often than not, it doesn't work, because when people just want to get rid of a deal and just move on with their life, or sell a deal, they just want to move on. They don't want to keep lingering all the time, right? So this might work if you're buying a single family house somewhere, duplexes, some version of that. It doesn't really work when you're buying 100, 200, 300 unit properties.
Yeah.
Again, and by doesn't work, I don't mean it never works. I just want to say this again. It just means in 99% of the times, it doesn't work. That's what I mean to say.
Yeah. Our market right now is about between, we basically brought from 1 mil to about 10 mil. So, I guess in the lower tier 1 for JVs.
It works. In the lower tier, there is a higher probability of working because the amounts are much lower.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
But if you say have a $40 million deal, yeah, it's going to be hard for somebody to carry a $35 million note if they're not a lender, right? So that's why.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, if there's no more questions, I think we can wrap it up. I'll leave your website here on the chat. And thank you so much. This has been
it's Boardwalk Wealth. It's not health. Basically.
Look at see the MD in me is coming out, right? So
if you go to boardwalkwealth.com, just sign up on the front page on the mailing list. You'll get to know all about us.
Perfect. So yes, thank you again so much for the lecture tonight. It was super informative. I think we'll definitely be revisiting this when we repost it on our YouTube. Lots of key information here. I think a lot of pearls. So
yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
You wanted to send, we're going to send you a copy also, and we really appreciate you. And with our next webinar, right? So that is going to be on the 18th by Dave Zook, who specializes in investing in alternative assets, self-storage, which we also do, but ATM and car washes, those are new asset class to me also. So you want to be there for that one.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, that will wrap it up for this episode and this webinar series. And we look to see you guys again on the next one. Thank you again, Omar, for a great lecture. And I hope everyone has a great evening.
Bye for now.
Thank you, guys. Bye.